Welcome, everyone. My name is Dave Zapponi of ECHO, otherwise known as the Educational Council of Homeowners. Thank you for taking part in this live stream webinar, Avoiding HOA Reserve Quicksand, presented by John Nordland and John Clinny. Robert Nordland and John Clinny. ECHO is a statewide nonprofit association created to support HOA board members and engaged homeowners. Our mission is to foster a better quality of life in community associations through education, advocacy, and connections. For today's event, we have a few housekeeping items. When hovering over the bottom of the screen, there are features that are available for use during this webinar. Please use the chat feature for any technical issues you may have during the presentation. The chat feature also can be used to send a message to a panelist, or to participants. Please use the Q&A feature for questions. Throughout the presentation, please use the thumbs up icon to vote for a question you would like answered. Questions will be answered during a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. During today's presentation, we will take 2 session breaks to paraphrase questions about the material just covered. I also will be answering some questions during the program in the Q&A feature. Due to the number of participants, we may not be able to answer all the questions during the scheduled Q&A session. In fact, we will not be able to. We have over 200 and I believe 280 registered participants today. Please always be courteous and respectful of the webinar participants, including speakers, staff, and sponsors. Any participant may be removed at the discretion of ECHO at any time and for any reason. This event is copyrighted by ECHO. We do not give permission to others to record the meeting in whole or in part. The program will be recorded. A copy of the recording, along with presentation slides, will be emailed to registered participants within 7 days of the program. This is an educational event and not a marketing forum for our service providers. Several sponsors have contributed to the support of today's program. Please join me in thanking the following sponsors. Our premier sponsors are Heritage Bank of Commerce and Kevin Bolin Insurance Agency. The program sponsor is Association Reserves. Our Q&A sponsors today are CID Consortium LLC and All Bay Construction Solutions. And finally, our registration sponsors are CNA Painting and the Pacific Western Bank. Robert Nordland, our speaker from Association Reserves, is providing us with a special treat today. We will raffle off 5 signed editions of Understanding Reserves, written by Mr. Nordland. Stay to the end of today for a chance to win. Kevin Bolin is a farmer's insurance agent based in Novato. Kevin is our active ECHO member and sponsor and specializes in managing insurance for homeowners association. Call on Kevin anytime with your insurance questions. We appreciate his premier ad sponsorship. Here is our legal disclaimer. None of what is said during this seminar shall be construed as specific legal advice from the speakers, sponsors, or ECHO. If you wish specific advice, we encourage you to contact your attorney. ECHO is not responsible for the comments of attendees. These are solely the responsibility of the attendee. And now on with the program. Our webinar today is Avoiding HOA Reserves Quicksand, presented by John Nordland and John Clinny, Robert Nordland and John Clinny. Robert has been involved in the community association industry since 1982. Robert founded Association Reserves, Inc. in 1986 and has pioneered many widely used reserve funding concepts. Robert was involved in creating the 1998 National Reserve Study Standards and has greatly influenced the reserve study industry. He is a past chairman of the Association of Professional Reserve Analysts. Robert regularly writes on the topic of reserve studies and is a frequent speaker in industry-sponsored seminars and presentations throughout the United States. He is often called to serve as expert witness in litigation involving reserve issues. John Clinny is a veteran certified portfolio manager and industry thought leader. As co-founder of Association Consulting Group, John advises and educates community association board members on a wide variety of community management topics. He provides management and management company evaluations, reviews, and search activities. John is passionate about encouraging self-managed associations and board members to be effective and successful. He does this by consulting with HOA boards on good community governance, best practices in community management, and common sense approaches to compliance with federal, state, and local statutes affecting common interest developments. Robert, thank you, and please begin the presentation.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. And we're here this afternoon because reserves can be a complicated issue. We don't want that to be the case. John and I are here because we believe we want to take something complicated and make it simple. We're going to take you on a journey today, helping you to avoid the quicksand that stands in front of you, that gets you mired and gets you sidetracked, slows you down from the priorities of running your association. So this is the outline that we're going to follow today. I'll handle the introduction, then we'll get into identifying quicksand, getting out of quicksand, avoiding quicksand, and then a summary at the end. So we take this situation and understand that it is a journey. If you were to plot it out on time, it's a journey over time. It's a journey to the future, and there's trouble along the way. It is a path that you need to follow, and it's the meandering path. You're going to make decisions along the way. It is a uncharted journey as we go into the future. And there's actually nothing you can do to stop the trouble that comes your way. We are all on this same planet that's spinning every day, moving a little bit forward, 24 hours closer to the future every day. Nothing we can do to stop ongoing deterioration. The big expenses are there, they're lurking. And if you're not careful, they're gonna jump out and bite you, scare you, and move you off track, and you're gonna get a little disoriented and again, lose track of what you're trying to accomplish at the association, which is running peaceful and productive communities. Now, the board has the responsibility of leading the association safely into the future. That's their charter by way of general principles of being the governing body, the leaders of the association, the board of directors. It may be specifically chartered in the actual governing, it might even say that in your governing documents, but the board has the responsibility to run the association in a fiscally responsible manner, in a sustainable manner. And the question is, with all these issues coming at you as you move forward into the future, will you get there safely or get stuck along the way? So first off, what is our destination? What does success look like? Well, with respect to reserves, it's sufficient reserves to perform your anticipated projects on time. Now, remember, we're not going to concern ourselves with the unknown. We're just talking about predictable reserve projects, the reserve projects that pass the National Reserve Study Standards 4-part test. And these are the ones you can see them coming. It amazes me when boards are surprised by a roof that failed on schedule over 20 years in plain sight. You should not be surprised by something that is not surprising. So we're talking about predictable reserve projects. So what we're trying to accomplish is to make sure that the cash grows at the same time deterioration progresses. So you end up having no deferred maintenance, no special assessments, and maximized property values. So that's where we're going to go today to try to help you get down this path towards the future. And at this point in time, we're going to turn the page and talk about identifying quicksand. And John, let me hand it off to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Robert. And welcome to all of you. We're going to, for the most part, make the assumption that those who are on the live stream webinar today are board members of their community associations. But if you're participating today as a concerned homeowner, that's great news as well, because we want you to be fully knowledgeable about the subject that we're talking about. I was very excited when Robert asked me to participate in this with him. Reserve planning is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm not a reserve specialist. Robert is the expert in the field, but I'm bringing some best practice awareness and experience from the community management point of view. So we're going to talk first about identifying some different types of quicksand. And just to let you know, we've seen all of these. These are real types of quicksand that we witness in our day-to-day work with community associations. And you can see them listed here. There's really 7 that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about hoarding reserves, depleting reserves, not collecting or preparing adequately for reserves, apathy, unsure of when to spend reserves, or fixating on the percent funded, and finally indecision. So let's talk about hoarding reserves. If you can flip the slide there for me, thank you very much. And this is a very real type of quicksand that board members often fall into. And board members become very comfortable with watching reserve balances grow in their reserve funding plan and on their balance sheets. Typically, we hear language such as, we can't spend that, or those are our savings, or aren't we really underfunded? And this really misses the point. Reserves are there, I like to say, to be spent. They're there to be spent in accordance with the strategy and the plan and the timing that you as a board member and your reserve specialists have worked out and have developed over time. Reserve planning is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and it goes on and on. But hoarding is a type of quicksand that often we can fall into. Let's talk about depleting reserves. Another type of quicksand is just wholesale depletion of reserves without a real plan, without a real purpose, without really contemplating what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, or how expensive the project is. And commonly it's recognized by, we've got the money. You know, it was always kind of a funny thing, but as a community manager, it was much easier for me to get boards to agree to reserve expenses and authorize and approve those rather than getting them to authorize and approve operating expenses. And that's because we feel like, hey, we've saved it, the money's there, let's go ahead and spend it. Or we say, the future's not my problem. We're going to talk about this later on in the presentation when we talk about fiduciary responsibility and sound business judgment. But the future is not my problem can lead us into a premature depletion of reserves when really we should have planned a little bit better. And then we can look at our balance sheet and say, oh my gosh, we got all this money in the bank. Let's spend some of this money. That just means you've been planning well, and maybe you have some large expenses on the way. Number 3 is not collecting or preparing adequately. And this is a problem. You know, in some ways, board members can trip and find themselves in quicksand because it's more of a sin of omission rather than a sin of commission, right? Let my Catholic roots show out there a little bit. But hey, you know, I didn't really mean it. We didn't really know any better. But not collecting, not budgeting, and not planning is really conveys an intentionality that that is really, really bad news and can be very critical for the association. Reserve specialists go to great lengths and spend lots of time working to identify lifespans of components, remaining life of components, cost to maintain and repair and replace components. And they provide us a roadmap of what contributions need to be made over time to make sure that those projects can be done what they need to be done. And if we don't follow that roadmap or have an ongoing conversation with our reserve specialists, right? There are parameters. Robert's going to talk about that. There are different ways we can get to the marathon finish line. Then we can be in trouble because either we're not collecting enough or we haven't adequately prepared. So commonly we'll see phrases like, we can't afford to increase assessments, or why get a reserve study if we're just going to ignore it? Or I'm only on the board for this year, not my problem. Why should I pay for someone else's roof? But the homeowners don't want to, but we earn almost no interest. So there's a lot of different things that can get us into this fallacy of not collecting or preparing adequately for reserves.
Hey, John, before we move from that, can I get you to touch on the last 2 bullet points? Who's running the association? Is it the homeowners or is it the board?
Oh, great question. And reserve funding plans, reserve strategy is board oriented. Now, let me say something though that's important. And what's important is that boards at some point, you've got to identify the expectations of your members. For instance, I live in an over 55 lifestyle community, okay? There are certain expectations I have living in an over 55 lifestyle community, and those expectations are around the ongoing maintenance, repair, and replacement of the components that I use daily that brought me to my community. Therefore, the board has the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility, to make sure that those expectations continue to be met so that our community values continue to stay solid or increase over time, and we have great reputational control of our community as well. So, homeowners don't get to make these decisions. I like to say that that homeowners associations are not democracies. I mean that with all due respect. But what homeowners do is they pay their dues, they pay assessments, and they vote for boards of directors, basically. Now, there are some other nuanced things that homeowners get involved in. But at the end of the day, homeowners pay assessments and they elect board members that are going to enact good governance.
And they're the ones with their, not just reputation, but liability on the line.
Absolutely. You betcha. Thank you. Very good question.
Chartered with that responsibility. And then I want to touch on some of the numbers, because on the technical side, we get involved with balancing the interest and inflation. And we get this sometimes, and I hear from boards that we earn almost no interest. So why should we be losing money? And when I get that question, I like to redirect them to think that it's not a matter of losing money. They may be falling behind gradually, but that's a matter of gradually falling behind because they are unequal. But you can just work that into the reserve plan. The board has that responsibility to set the money aside so it's ready to resurface the tennis courts, or replace the roof, that kind of thing. So it fundamentally has to be there, and earning very little interest is not a good argument. Now, on the opposite, we hear boards who say, well, can't I or shouldn't I then be fiscally responsible and try to earn more money, get a higher rate of return? And the trade-off there is risk. And that's where, in my terminology, I think they enter into the opportunity of actually losing money, where if it's in a risky investment that might go down. So it's a nuance in words. Are you losing money or are you falling behind? I'm okay with falling behind because we can manage that in the reserve plan. Losing money, my point of view, that's a board that shoots themselves in their foot.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's statutory requirements around investment vehicles and opportunities for homeowners associations. And in dealing with reserves, the common best practice is that number one, we protect the capital, preservation of capital. Number two, we make sure that capital is liquid when we need it. And number three, we worry about the rate of return.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the three that we're looking for in a good investment strategy for your reserves. Let's look at apathy for a minute. Apathy is it's kind of the ugly twin of intentionality, right? And doing something where you really are deliberately or otherwise just not wanting to address a situation. And apathy comes about when boards get kind of stuck. They just get stuck or they get fixated on something. I've seen boards recently, had an opportunity to work with a board that was relatively stuck on a large roofing project, and they only had about a third of the money saved in reserves, and they were stuck for years. I mean, literally years went by and the board was just stuck and couldn't figure out how to get their hands around this size of a project. And so we want to be careful that we don't fall into just being apathetic because we feel overwhelmed or we feel ill-equipped or we feel like we're not experts. We're going to chat about that a little bit more in the presentation. And commonly apathy is recognized by, hey, you know what? That roof's got another 10 years. You know, I'm not even going to be here. That's going to be someone else's problem. Or don't we have more important things to discuss? You know, let's talk about the parking, people, and pets, right? And oftentimes we don't focus on what's really important, which is the long-term financial sustainability of our community. Or we fall into the trap of, hey, you know, the association down the street, I know someone who lives there and they don't have any money in their reserves and they're doing just fine.
And they're doing just fine.
And their assessments are cheaper than ours. Oh, by the way. So that's some different ways that you can fall into apathy. Let's talk about number 5. Sometimes we're unsure exactly when to spend on reserves. Reserve studies are great. They are very detailed. They're very exacting, and they provide us with their best expert guess and estimate of the life of a component and the remaining life of the component. Robert's going to talk about this a little bit later on, and that's going to help us create a plan for a comprehensive, rational spending of our reserves. Not willy-nilly, not, hey, I was walking by the pool the other night on my way to the board meeting and I noticed that the pool deck is all cracked. Maybe we need to spend some money on reserves and fix the pool deck. But it should be very, very deliberate. There should be, and maybe it's your organizational meeting when you elect new board members, but there should be a time when you organize yourself as a board and schedule meeting time to just talk about the reserve plan and the reserve study and your reserve strategy for the year. Don't wait till the end of the year. First part of the year, begin to talk about what are we going to work on this year. Some of your reserve projects will be large capital projects, and it's not like you're going to be able to snap your finger and get them done. You're going to have to do some very comprehensive project planning to get to those points. Other ones might be real simple. Hey, we need to plaster the pool. No big deal. It's a small job. Maybe it's under 40, 50,000 bucks. And let's make sure we get it done before the pool's supposed to open on Mother's Day, right? So some projects are going to be a little more simpler. Some are going to be much more comprehensive and in depth. And that often leads us to being unsure about when to pull the trigger, when to start the process, and when to get involved. And so that's a trap we can, some quicksand we can fall into. The next one, Robert, do you want to say something about the 4-part test?
Sure. Again, we're trying to help everyone here just not get stuck, be able to identify that quicksand. And when you sense that you don't know what to spend reserves on, that in one extreme, as John, we spoke about, you don't want to get into a point where you're hoarding reserves. But on the other hand, you don't want to just be spending reserves willy-nilly. And so you want to know what are the appropriate things. And the reserve study professionals are guided by National Reserve Study standards. And there's a 4-part test that dictates what should be funded through reserves. And you can see on screen, should be a common area reserve component, should have a limited useful life, should have a predictable remaining useful life, meaning that it's not just random, and then it's above minimum cost. And you put those things together, and when you or the reserve professional are walking around the association, things that fit that 4-part test are the things that should be in your or on your reserve component list. And that is the master definition that you see right here on screen. So we want you understanding what we are saving for with a reserve plan and what those reserves are to be spent on. And just to clarify or maybe elaborate a little bit, what we're looking for is things that assets that are not the responsibility or ownership of the management company. If you have on-site management, their desks, their computers, you should not be reserving for those things. And you should not be reserving for things that are expected to last the life of the property. And then there's some things that you don't know when they're going to happen. And those often end up being insurable losses, which is a wonderful thing. Those are not reserve components. And you also don't want to be cluttering your reserve component list with trivia, mops, buckets, light bulbs, things like that. So significant projects, and you can sometimes lump projects together, and instead of the 2 bar stools and the 8 chairs that are in the clubhouse, maybe you develop a component for clubhouse refurbish or clubhouse refinish and have a significant project that comes together. So this is the National Reserve Study Standards 4-part test that guides us and keeps us from getting stuck. And let me take you to the next point, and that's getting stuck on percent funded. And we see that from our point of view, where some boards think that the objective is a certain percent funded, and that's their goal. And to me, that tells me that they've lost their vision for where they're trying to get to in the future. They're off looking at percent funded. Now, percent funded, they're benchmarks along the way. And it just tells you, how are we doing? What's our risk level? Basically, it's almost like, how close to the center of the path am I walking? When your percent funded is low, then you end up having a little more risk. But we have some clients that are talking about, well, we can't do that because it'll drop our percent funded. Or I've had one that said, well, let's just turn over garage doors to individual homeowners. And that way we can remove that line item and that'll bop our percent funded up. Or I ran on a conservative platform that we're going to get our percent funded above a certain level. And you're looking at the wrong thing. The goal is sufficient reserves to do your projects on time. And getting fixated on percent funded just tells me that you're looking at the wrong target.
All right, our last type of quicksand is indecision. And in some ways, indecision is the, I guess, the unintended consequence of a lot of these types of quicksand, right? We just get to the point where we are unable to make clear decisions or to think clearly, or we get stuck in our own agendas or in our own sense of expertise and are not able to really begin to develop a comprehensive plan. Oftentimes indecision is recognized by, gosh, what if we make the wrong decision? Or we could be wrong. Maybe we shouldn't pull the trigger now. Or, you know what, that doggone balcony looks fine to me. I mean, yeah, I can see a little bit. I can see the cracks and I can see the stuff and the exposed areas, but you know, it really looks fine to me and let's just move on. Or let's discuss that next month, right? Kicking the can down the road. Oftentimes discussion next month comes about because we haven't really gotten all the information we need this month to be able to make good decisions, and we push stuff off until next month. Or, you know what, our term's almost up. time to let's let the next board decide. I just, this is going to be a hot button issue, and I don't want to be involved in this process. And those all lead to indecision that can really lead to deferred maintenance. And Robert probably will touch on this, but deferred maintenance, you want to stay away from that, because in most cases, you need to be disclosing deferred maintenance. And Robert's group and reserve specialists put together a really neat disclosure that needs to go with your annual budget and policy disclosure packets. And that disclosure asks about deferred maintenance. And smart boards that are, sometimes there are good reasons to defer. Sometimes you have to defer. I get it. It happens. But boards that are concerned with good governance should be absolutely communicating that deferred maintenance and disclosing it to their membership. It can be a real problem. So indecision can be a horrible thing to get stuck into, and it's something that you've got to push through. So let's take a look and get back to our focus on our next slide. And remember our we're off to see the wizard visual here, right? We're headed to the Emerald City. We want to make sure that we stay on track. We want to bring our focus back to the fact that we want to get to the goal. And I think, as Robert said so well, the goal is that we have sufficient reserves. And when we say reserves, we mean cash in the bank, right? We have sufficient reserves to perform projects on time with no deferred maintenance and no special assessments. Now, that can't always happen. In fact, the group that I worked with on the big roofing project ended up funding a third of it from a special assessment. So, we can't always escape special assessments. And sometimes special assessments aren't the result of poor planning. Sometimes they're just the result of things that are beyond our control. And board members, if you're out there and you're considering a special assessment or an emergency special assessment, don't beat yourself up. These things happen. Especially, we've got this new bill floating around called SB 326, right? Don't beat yourself up. These things happen. But we don't want as much as possible deferred maintenance. We want to minimize or have no special assessments, and we want to maximize the property values. That's very, very important. And that's it for our first session.
Great, thanks. So there are some themes that are going along here. A lot of the questions I've been trying to monitor, a lot of these questions are asking about what if the board just doesn't agree with what the assessment comes in. What if they say, hey, we should have more money put away or not as much, or they want to invest in different things. What do you do about that?
John, let me jump on that one.
Yeah.
David, you were kind. Usually they say the reserve study people are crazy. That may be more a direct quote. And we may recommend $5,000 a month. And the board may say they're crazy. We just can't afford that. And we get back to the quicksand where the board is thinking what we can or cannot afford, realizing that the roof is predictable, the asphalt is predictable, the pool is predictable, the deterioration of the paint is predictable. All those things are predictable. We're not making these things up. And those bills are going to come due whether you like it or not. And it's just a matter of the board fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility to look at the truth of the matter. We talk about the reserve study sometimes being the coffee that wakes them up, telling them what's going on. It shows them those expenses far enough in advance that they can begin to prepare and adjust course. So they're not going to walk straight into, in today's terminology, the quicksand. So we do encourage the board to reach out and say, hey, we don't have a mile of fence, 5,280. We have about 500 feet. Was that a typo on your part? those kinds of things do happen. But if you say we don't have a mile of fence, and I say, yes, you do, I measured it myself. And they say, oh, gee, that's right. I forgot about behind phase 3. Sometimes it is waking the board up.
Okay. And you mentioned a little bit about their fiduciary responsibility. I got a question or two on that. Yeah. So is the board required to do that? And maybe this is another question for John. What if they know what the reservist says, but they said, we just don't want to do that? Is that an actionable offense? I mean, is that violation of their fiduciary responsibility, or can they make a business decision like that?
Well, we're going to talk about that a little later on. So I think I'm going to defer that one, Dave. And if the person that asked it doesn't get satisfaction, we'll get back to it in the Q&A. But we're going to talk very specifically about that just a little bit further on. So if that's okay, in the interest of moving on, we'll defer that one. We'll get there.
Here's a group of things, and you may be talking about this later. There are several questions, not one person, have talked about the use of special assessments versus reserves, and can they use reserve money to take care of problems that could have popped up that aren't in the reserve study? How do they deal with those? And I had one question where a person asked, well, we have a major improvement we want to make in the property. Is that in the reserve study?
Yeah, those are good questions. Robert's going to have some good input on that and part of that is the 4-part rule there in terms of what the reserve study items there. But I would say one thing to be very careful of is do not fund capital projects from reserves. And when I say capital projects, I'm talking about capital improvement projects. I'm talking about something that is not identified as a reserve component. You don't want to go there. There's other ways to do it. We could have a whole session on it. Right. But you want to stay away from taking money out of reserves for supportive operating and for projects that are not identified as a reserve component. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, with that 4-part test number 1 is it's an existing common area maintenance responsibility. And the new tennis court is not an existing common area maintenance responsibility, so it fails a test. You should not be funding something new with funds that are dedicated towards existing projects. And the problem with special assessments is you're not always sure they're going to pass. And so as much in advance, you want to prepare in advance and let the magic of compounding interest reduce the amount of money that is going from your homeowner pockets to the roofer, the painter, the asphalt person, because it's great, even at the small interest rates that we're getting right now, for the bank to be contributing to reserves. Anything you can do to minimize the reserve obligations of your homeowners is great. And that's one way to do it, is by planning in advance and letting the financial magic of compounding interest have its effect. Okay.
Well, let's go ahead and move on with the program then.
All right, thank you. So let's, now that we've dealt with some different types of quicksand that we can fall into, or that we're prone to fall into, maybe I should say a little bit better. Let's talk about how we get out of the quicksand. And I will promise you, board members that are on the live stream webinar, you are going to fall into some of this quicksand. It's going to happen from time to time. It's probably not super avoidable. There will be different dynamics on your board of directors. There's going to be different kinds of individuals elected to your board. You're going to have different pressures and situations that come up, or just the unknown implications of the California State Legislature, right? So there are a lot of things that may compel you to fall into the quicksand, even inadvertently. But let's talk about how we get out of it. So the first way to get out of it, and I mean this with all sincerity, don't be afraid to ask for help. Remember, you were elected to the board to fulfill a fiduciary duty of service to your community. I'm going to talk about that duty a little bit later on, but it doesn't mean that you are an expert at everything. What you concentrate on as a board member is good governance. Doesn't mean you know how to put on a new roof. Doesn't mean you know everything there is to know about replacing the siding. It just means that you know how to yell for help in pursuit of good governance. We're going to talk about that very, very specifically. You can get help from your community management professional. You can get help from consultants. You can get help from your credentialed reserve study professional, maybe your CPA, whoever. But there are people out there that you are going to interact with on a regular basis that can help you do that. So let's talk a little bit about the what is going to override everything we do. And board members, you're probably sick and tired of hearing about the business judgment rule. You've heard about it forever. Whenever you have someone from the legal community come and talk to you, they pound on you about the sound business judgment rule. And the sound business judgment rule is what should compel us to ask for help in getting out of the quicksand we find ourselves in with reserve planning. And I want to talk about the first aspect of this, which is actually the last one here on our list, which is the duty of inquiry. The duty of inquiry is super important, and it's your fundamental protection as a board member, because it means that you've drawn together a team of experts that help you get through and inform your decision-making process. They're not making decisions, but they are helping to inform you of the process. And that's the duty of inquiry. Robert, take us through some specific examples.
Yeah, it could be as simple as like what happened at where I lived in my last association. A shopping center was redeveloped. They put in some nice landscaping right around it, some low water consumption landscaping. And I had an opportunity to make a suggestion to our board about what we should do when we had a landscape project coming up. And I said, go to the nearest Vaughn's and take a look. And actually, the board did the right thing. They said, we checked with our landscaper. And they said that given the trees that we have around our association, that wouldn't work here. And that phone call or that email that the board made to our landscaper was exactly that simple clarification. The board doesn't need to know themselves. They don't need to be the expert, but they need to know who to ask. And that saved them from making an expensive mistake with landscaping. Well, with respect to quicksand and reserves, it's important for you to know what you're up against. As John indicated just a few moments ago, you have a light reserve expense year coming up where all you're doing is maybe replacing the patio furniture or resurfacing the pool. Or do you have a big reserve expense year? Take a look at what you see on screen. We call this the fingerprint. These are the reserve expenses through the years for a particular association. What stands out on this one is in about 8 or 10 years, about a third of the way through this 30-year plan, they have a humongous expense. And so this board needs to appreciate that in the first few years, they may not have a lot of expenses. This helps you not get spendthrift because you realize that we're getting ready for that big one about, again, eight years or so out. That's going to be our focus. And so that helps you understand what are we doing and why. Or it could be different. Let's take a look at a different profile. This board has a very different situation where that large expense year is just a year away. They're just up against the wall. If this new board is coming in and they don't have very much reserves and they call in John to help them consult, he's going to say, you're in a heap of trouble because this big predictable 20-year asphalt resurface project was gradually creeping up in plain sight and prior boards didn't prepare. And you guys are in a jam. We just don't have time. So this may be one of those true special assessment situations because prior boards had not prepared them. And so you have a different situation. Or could be yet another profile. And this is a third example scattered throughout the years. High expense years, low expense years. Or let's take a look at another one, even more scattered. So you have to appreciate that your expense situation is going to be unique, and that's going to dictate the kind of decisions you make. Again, in this profile, the board has to get through year number 2. They have to get through year number, I guess, by year number 9. And then they can't just forget about reserve planning because they got a big one about 29 years out. These kinds of things guide your plan and help you understand what the goal is and keep you on track. Because as we see in the next slide, that you're on a path and you're going to have so many decision points. And we want you to know where you're going so you can make the right decisions along the way. And just like John indicated, if you do have a decision, if you're faced with a choice, by all means, with respect to reserves, reach out to your reserve provider, give them a call, shoot them an email, say, hey, I don't see X on our reserve component list. What should I do? So look at your big picture, know what your path to the future looks like, and be quick and easy to reach out for help.
Let's get back to the business judgment rule and talk about the second aspect of that, which is the duty of loyalty. And I want to throw out a proposition to you board members, and something that I think is absolutely true in all cases, and that is that your responsibility as a board member on a board of directors responsible for managing the affairs of your association. One of those is to levy assessments that meet the operating needs of the association and the reserve requirements of the association. That's a statutory requirement. And that duty of loyalty has to do with the fact that it's going to manifest itself for current owners and future owners. This is really important, and sometimes we lose track of this with these projects that spike maybe 10 years from now or 15 years from now, or maybe for instance, the roofing project. I mean, were there some homeowners that raised their hand and said, John, you're telling us we need to do a special assessment. What happened to the board 10 years ago? This has been on our reserve study forever. Why didn't they adequately plan 10 years ago? I don't know. Can't answer that question. Should they have? Yeah. Did other things come up? Maybe. Who knows? It's crying over spilt milk at that point. And that's why board members, when you approach your stewardship of your associations, the business judgment rule says you have a duty of loyalty. And you may be saying to yourself, you know what, this is my first home. It's my initial condo. I'm serving on the board, but I'm going to be out of here in 5 years. I really don't care what expenses are coming up in year 7. My goal is to keep the assessments as low as possible. That's incorrect thinking, and it's thinking that's going to get you in hot water. You need to act in the best interest of your association without regard to what it means for you, without self-serving. And that's oftentimes very, very hard for us because sometimes when we're running for the board or we're trying to get elected, we may make promises that we can't keep. We're one board member on a board of 3 or a board of 5 or a board of 7. And we need to govern and work together as a board. So in terms of getting out of quicksand, we want to make sure that we are adjusting our budget. As I said in the last slide, the responsibility is to levy assessments to meet the operating needs of the association, right? Landscaping, pool maintenance, clubhouse maintenance, whatever it might be, and to provide for reserves. How much do we contribute to reserves every year? That's where Robert's work comes in. And he will tell you, and I will challenge you, board, when you get ready to work on your budget for 2022, I challenge you that the first number you put in that pro forma budget is the suggested, the recommended contribution that your reserve specialist has said. Make that your first entry. And then plug in all your other operating expenses. And I hate to tell you, but it's going to take you right to what your assessments need to be. Now, does that mean there might not be some wrangling and discussions? Absolutely, there's going to be wrangling. Absolutely, there's going to be discussions. You know, you may get your reserve specialist on the phone or have them come out to a board meeting and work with you to maybe make things a little more palatable. Or maybe you talk to your general contractor and he said, you know what, you know, that siding can go another 3 or 4 years. I think we're going to be okay. So now you can make some adjustments, but start with the bad news. Start with the big numbers and work backward to see where you need to be to have a rational plan. And then I would say, just real quickly, make sure you're transparent with your membership. Be very, very obvious in your public agendas about what you're talking about at your meetings. Don't obfuscate. Let people know what you're talking about. And then disclose. Be sure you're disclosing what's going on. One of the greatest numbers, and I wish it was a statutory requirement, I don't believe it is, but one of the greatest numbers that I see coming out of Robert's work and other reserve specialists is the liability or is the deficit or the equity number per homeowner, right, Robert?
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, that's going to tell you everything you need to know. If you're disclosing that to your homeowner is going to say, hey, worst case scenario, I'm writing a check to my HOA for 15 grand, or hey, worst case scenario, you know, I got equity of $5,000 toward reserve contributions and toward reserves. That's a very important number. And we'll consider, maybe we can consider that during the Q&A period. So Robert, talk a little bit more about how we get out of quicksand.
Right. Well, John, you challenged everyone to make or show their duty of loyalty and make the appropriate budget adjustments. I just want to provide some counsel here that often associations are in a heap of trouble or stuck in quicksand due to years or decades of prior boards not making adequate reserve contributions. So they're in a bad situation. You don't have to get out all at once. And in fact, getting out gently is the preferred method. Smooth transitions, take steps of progress. If, for instance, you are currently making reserve contributions of $3,000 a month and your reserve study comes back with a recommendation of $6,000 a month, I would hope that the board reaches out to the reserve provider and says, hey, what are our options? Can we maybe go up to 4,000 this year, 5,000 the year after, 6,000 the year after, and transition ourselves up? Find out what you can do. There's no requirement. You have, let me say that differently. You have no requirement to instantly get out of quicksand. It may be a little bit of a messy period. Maybe you have a few years of special assessments, but you can adjust your budget and right the ship of the association, getting it moving forward in the right direction. So you're not responsible to do more than is possible, but you are responsible to make wise decisions in the best interest of the corporation.
Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about, we have a number of questions. First of all, SB 326, can you give us a quick definition of what that is and what it entails?
That's the dreaded balcony bill, right?
Yeah.
And if you are lucky enough to live in a condominium association of 3 or more units, you're responsible to and I don't have the bill in front of me, so I don't want to paraphrase, but well, I'm going to paraphrase. You're responsible to complete a visual inspection by a otherwise certified architect, engineer, or whoever, with a written report. I believe it's every 6 years. And that's coming up. That bill was enacted January 1st of 2020. The first deadlines are starting to come up. And if you're not aware of that bill, and this is on all elevated wooden structures in your association, and I believe it's what, like 6 feet off the ground or more or something.
Yep.
So, you know, if you've got walkways, if you've got stairways, if you've got balconies, and those are all common area components, or exclusive use common area components. So you want to be mindful of that. My apologies for not giving you that information when I mentioned it. Sorry about that.
It's only for PUD. It's not for PUDs, and it's not for
Nope.
single family residents.
That's correct. Yeah, this is condominiums of 3 units or more.
Okay, and so got a question about communication. It seems to be ongoing in this. When you have all of these adjustments to make through the years, and you have, you have a board that's conscientious and really wants to do the right thing, but they don't know when or how, and they're sort of a little, they're on less firm ground, starting to slide into quicksand, and they're moving, and one arm's reaching out. You can visualize that. What do you do with the community? Because if you go in and say, hey, we're going to do a special assessment for the next 3 years, that's probably not the best way, or maybe it is. Or, so what is the role of communication to the community in this process?
Before Robert jumps in, I'm going to say often. You cannot communicate enough to your members, especially when it has to do with their pocketbook. Another thing you can do that I think is a great thing is to use town hall meetings. Town hall meetings are not subject to the Open Meeting Act. You can convene a town hall meeting with just a simple announcement, and you can bring in experts like Robert and say, hey, Robert, we're having a town hall meeting because we believe we're in trouble on our reserves. Put the target on Robert's back and let him be the bad guy.
I got thick skin and a bulletproof vest.
Entertain questions, but you have to do it often. Communication is the key. You don't want there to be any surprises, especially for this one association where we did the roofing project. We probably had 2 or 3 town hall meetings. We discussed different funding options. We let people provide input. We did member surveys. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And the outcome was really, really wonderful. But you have to communicate. You can't hide. It doesn't necessarily reflect bad on the current board of directors. Remember, board, you can't control what your previous boards have done. You can only work with what you've got.
Yeah. All I would say is work the plan, show the homeowners that you have a plan, you have a reserve study that says, yes, patio furniture is a little bit old. We are getting new patio furniture next year. And the asphalt, yeah, it's a little dry, but again, no worries. It's on the schedule to get done next year. The reserve study itself can be an important disclosure process, keeps the board on track. And so you're not distracted with all those near-term projects that cloud your vision. So reserve study helps you see forward into the future and helps you prepare.
Yeah, there's an interesting story that I have from a HOA, large HOA in Sacramento. And they called me and were ready to throw out their new board and their new management company, and because they were doing a special assessment because they needed new siding on the condominiums and they hadn't changed the roof in more than 30 years. And so things were starting to fall apart. So they were just doing spot fixes for many years because they wanted to keep the assessments down. Mm-hmm. Well, the general manager left. They brought in a new management firm. Bottom line there is they were out with pitchforks and what have you to get rid of the board. Here we're getting rid of these guys because they're giving us a special assessment. I said, well, you want your roof and you want your siding. Bottom line, they're doing it right now. They're telling you what the problem is, and don't get rid of that board. That's the one you want in that management firm at the time. They're the ones that you want. They're just telling you the bad news that you probably didn't know about. Now you can treat the ailment. Now you can treat the real problem and understand how to manage it. So communication, probably 70% of the questions I get are from the boards on reserves or from members can be resolved a lot easier if you communicate well. There are a bunch of questions here about what do you do about things that aren't in the reserve study that are going to be big, or things that we forgot, or What do you do about that? So that's one. And then the other one that I think is really worth talking about is inflation. And because inflation, right now you're losing money by putting by increasing your reserve funds and keeping money there.
You're falling behind.
You're
Not
falling
losing
behind.
money.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Now, Robert, I
Yeah.
stand corrected, but for your terminology. So I won't say it, money, it's behind in terms of inflation.
Yep.
If one of the standard ways to deal with inflationary costs, like now with the cost of construction being so high, I mean, it's huge right now. And the demand for people to inspect your balconies is increasing dramatically, even though we have new players coming into the market. The inflation rate on those specific sector costs are rather dramatic. Doesn't it make sense to do it sooner than later and to advance your schedule of doing the work?
Yes. At this point in time, we got hit with a double whammy. A lot of corporations were, I want to say, sucking it up last year because we were in the middle of a pandemic that was shutting people down. So a lot of corporations did not do their annual minor increment of costs, and they did not pass those on to the clients. And this year, with everything opening up, a lot, just naturally, so many companies are giving 2 years worth of cost increases to their clients. Add the supply chain problems we experience around the world. All of a sudden, there are a number of components that are significantly more expensive than anticipated 2 or 3 years ago. And that is the arena that is the best argument for updating your reserve study regularly, because reserve studies have cost escalators built in. But every once in a while, there's going to be something unstable that unsettles the cost estimates. And that's why it's in your best interest to update your reserve study regularly.
Okay, well, we got to move on. I'm getting word. So let's move on to the final section here.
Certainly. Okay. Thank you, Dave. So let's talk about now avoiding the quicksand. We talked about what is the quicksand, getting out of it. How do we keep our eye on the target and avoid the quicksand altogether? So when I think about that, I want to encourage you that it's all about sustainability. So one of the biggest things that affects us as humans is our word choice. And the word choice is important here with respect to reserves. When you're talking about reserve contributions, don't talk about them as for the future, because when you say for the future, it sounds like someone else's problem, someone else 7 years from now. Well, it's not. Contributions offset ongoing deterioration. John mentioned it a moment ago. When you're setting your operating budget, it's the landscaper, it's the maintenance, it's maybe the janitorial service that vacuums your hallways. Those are, and the utilities and the management costs, those are ongoing costs. You have to appreciate that deterioration is an ongoing cost. And if you don't pay that bill, it's going to hit you hard at a future point in time. So thinking about sustainability, make the contributions that offset deterioration. If you take care of the present, the future will take care of itself. And then do rely on trusted guides. If you come up with a situation where, wow, you got a big expense, you look in your reserve study and it's not there, your first call should be to your manager or your reserve study professional. Ask them for help. It's not your problem. We don't want you to get stuck in indecision, apathy, or thinking that, well, wow, that's a new expense, let's spend it. We got the money. Or, well, we were saving our reserves for something else. We can't spend it. Reach out, get help. That's a very important point that we want to be making here today. And as I said a moment ago, update your reserve study regularly. It goes out of date every year as the situation changes. We learned that so much. Last year, boy, February of last year, I was on vacation with my family. And we were hearing news about some crazy things happening in China. And I had no idea that our world was going to change in the middle of March. And things changed last year. Things are changing again this year. We've got a new administration in the White House. We have a governor that's subject to recall. There's so many things going on. Update your reserve study regularly. The closer you can tune in your aim on the future, The more you refine your aim on the future, the better you're going to be at getting to where you want to go.
All right. We've said it before, don't hesitate to reach out to management professionals and reserve study professionals. And I want to throw a couple other ones out here for you. Robert, I thought, chose his words wisely in describing common area components as being in a constant state of deterioration. I just look at myself, right? Turning 65 years old. I can promise you I am in a state of deterioration. I can't play tennis like I used to. My golf swing isn't what it was. And it just happens to the world around us. And so who better to talk about the current condition of your components than the people that service those components week in and week out? Invite the pool maintenance guy to the board meeting. Hey, what are you seeing? What kind of shape is our filter in? How about our heating unit? What about the plaster? How's the pool deck? What are you seeing? What are you finding out? You're out here every week, you're maintaining it. He is the best professional to ask about what's going on with a component. That might lead you to change some of your assumptions and provide valuable information for your reserve specialist. Or maybe you want to talk to your landscape maintenance vendor contractor. Hey, what's going on with the property? Tell us about the current condition. What do we need to be concentrating on? How are our timers and our clocks and our irrigation system? And is there anything we should be thinking about? Once again, that's going to inform your ability to make decisions. Remember, the duty of inquiry should drive everything you do as a board member, because that duty of inquiry is your backstop when people want to be critical of the decisions that you're making. And with the open meeting, we're going to have those discussions right in front of our members. If they want to show up and to the board meeting and listen to our deliberations and listen to our discussions, listen to what the landscape professional has to say, or the janitor or the pool guy, they are going to see that you are fulfilling your duty of inquiry, which is so important. Robert.
Great. Well, John, you've articulated wonderfully. Let me bring this in for a landing here, help us to summarize our time together. So the quicksand is out there. We're all moving forward to the future. We're all aging. We're all deteriorating. Our roof, our paint, our asphalt, our own bodies. The quicksand is out there, and there's nothing you can do about it. It is out there. So you're on the journey. You don't have a choice about it. So you need to do your best, level best, to get prepared. We are on this roller coaster together. And fortunately, you're not on your own. You can reach out and grab hold of that person next to you. And, if you're on a roller coaster, you can scream and yell and enjoy. But as a board member, you're not on your own. Don't think you're on your own. Quicksand is out there. So be easy, be quick to reach out and get some help. And there are landmarks along the way. There's your reserve study update. There's last year's budget. There's the budget from 2 years ago. There's the association across the street. If you can reach out to your portfolio manager, they may know other associations that have gone through the same thing. In your reserve study, you can look at your percent funded and see if you're growing up or going down. There's a lot of things to look at, so you can sense what is the multi-year progression that we are making here. And then finally, just keep your eyes open. You're the board. You're not getting paid to do this. We want you to be acting wisely. So keep your eyes open, look around, reach out, follow your guides, and you will be just fine. So that's what we want to leave you with, and the encouragement that you can reach out to your informed professionals around you and avoid getting into quicksand, getting stuck with quicksand, and moving on to having a successful future at your association.
Great. Well, we're going to move into the Q&A section of this program, and we'll take your questions. I have asked people to vote on their favorite question. We'll just start at the top of the list in a couple seconds here. I'll give you a couple seconds, five or 10 seconds to vote in the Q&A function. Also, I want to say thank you to All Bay Construction Solutions Incorporated and CID Consortium LLC for sponsoring the Q&A section. Thank you for that. Let's see where we are on the first question. Okay, with 15 thumbs up, is being 100% funded realistic, desirable, or something that most HOAs do not need to attain?
Let me jump on that one. 100% funded is a goal. It's the center of the bullseye. You want to keep your eye on the target, and that's a great place to be a great place to have your aim. You don't have to be there to enjoy the benefits of being well funded. If you are, the numbers support that if your association is 70% funded or higher, you're in a position of reserve fund strength. So if your child comes back and got a 71 on their chemistry test, you may be, I would say, in most cases, a little disappointed. You want to encourage them to have more success. But if your association is 71% funded, you are at a position of strength. You may want to aim towards being 100% funded. Good for you. We find that about 30% of associations are above 70% funded. So that's a good chunk of the community association world out there. Join them. Adjust
So
your
Robert,
budget. Yeah.
I've got a question for you, and this just happened recently with an association I was consulting with. Can you define what you mean by funded?
Well, percent funded is the balance of the reserve cash that you have to deterioration. For instance, let's say an association has one thing and they have a guardhouse. And that guardhouse is something they want to renovate. And again, let's make the numbers real easy. Every 10 years, it's going to cost 10 grand to renovate it. Okay. And let's say it is, you're 5 years in, you're halfway there. If you have $5,000 on hand, that nicely matches that gatehouse being 50% defunded or 50% deteriorated. So its deterioration is $5,000. So if you have $5,000, you are 100% funded. Basically, you're on pace.
So here's the misconception that comes up. Is someone will look at, you guys, reserve specialists are really fond of putting the big numbers down sometimes, right? Which is let's say we have the maximum destruction that can happen and we have to replace 100% of the common area items or the components. And let's say it's the sum of all those components. That's not what we mean when we're talking about percentage funded.
Correct.
Right. And I think there's a misconception oftentimes between what exactly we mean when we talk about percentage funded. Your percentage funding is based on the individual components.
Right. Well, it's
and
based
going
on
through
the components. Either way, it's matching the cash to the deterioration.
Right.
If your assets are all 50% deteriorated, then you only need 50% of the cash on hand, and you are 100% funded because there's a match. We're not talking about a meteor strike here. We're not talking about the fabled earthquake that drops us into the Pacific Ocean. We're talking about just making sure that, and I think of it sometimes like a store. If you open a store, it's got assets on the shelves. Okay. You just want to be making sure you collect enough in the till from the customers that you can replace the assets on the shelf. That's all you're talking about. You don't need the cash to replace all the assets, just the ones that walked out the door. So all we're talking about is matching the cash and reserves to the deteriorated value. And that is a very attainable goal.
Okay, let's move to the next question. We're running very close on time. So if an item, again with 14 thumbs up, if an item has finished its useful life but is still working, although probably not efficiently, should the board authorize its replacement or wait until it breaks?
There's 5 different categories of ways a component can fail. I don't want to go into all of them, but they range from things that you should do proactively, like a boiler on the roof of a mid-rise. If that's your only source of hot water, you don't want to wait for that to fail. You want to be proactive, and it can go all the way on the other extreme to a wait and see. And that can be the hot water heater that's in the clubhouse. So people can get hot water when they wash their hands after a board meeting or before a board meeting. If someone goes in there after 6 months and says, oh, there's no hot water, that's when you buy a new hot water heater. It's not a critical thing. You get it replaced in a week and it's ready for the next board meeting in the next month. No big deal. So contact your reserve site professional and ask for the sensitivities.
Yeah, and I would just say that's balancing risk and expectation. Once again, do people expect to have hot water in their units when they take their shower in the morning? You bet. So make sure boards that you're managing that risk and expectation.
Well, and one other thing is that if it's a health and safety issue, you should be planning
Always.
those. Always check and make sure that the safety of the community is looked after.
But the answer to that question differs depending on what component it is. Reach out and ask a reserve study professional.
Right.
Yep.
So Robert, if a reserve study professional budgets say 300,000 for a particular replacement in a couple of years, and in a couple of years you get to this whatever they're replacing, they're repaving or whatever, and all the bids are coming in at 500,000 or 600,000. Do you who's responsible for that? Who's culpable for the sort of misplanning, if you will? Reserve study specialist, or is it the board?
It's generally a combination. We're in the business of predicting the future, and that's inherently difficult to do. The biggest problem is boards that come to us with a reserve study that we did 10 years ago and said that, oh, you said it was going to cost $100,000 to repaint our building. And here we are, it's $225,000. And we say a reserve study is a 1-year projection. Anything over 1 year is on your own risk. And so that's the number one cause of a missed expectation. And number two, it may be an unknown issue that was unknowable. Third, it might be an upgrade. I had one association that was red hot that their roof was far in excess of what we estimated. And it turned out they were taking their flat roof and putting a pitched roof on top of it. And it's a totally different scope of work. And so you need to go through and find out a little bit of peeling the layers back on the onion. Where did that estimate come from? How old is it? And sometimes it's just, hey, right now, lumber is a whole lot more expensive than it was last year, and no one could have known.
Right. Okay. So basically, it's everything kind of rolls back to the board of directors, but the board of directors is responsible for the management and those estimations to make sure that they're valid and makes sense. And then you ask your expert about that to make sure that makes sense. You got to use some of your own sense too, because the world is changing dramatically. You got to kind of anticipate that. Participate in ECHO webinars so that you can get the good inside scoop as it happens. So. I know that was a shameless plug, but here's a good question from Judith. If an item has been finished its useful life, but okay, that's one we just went through. My HOA has historically been underfunded reserves over many years. Using the reserve study as a guideline, we're significantly behind on projected usages as the community hits 20 to 25 years of age. So despite having funds on hand, we're pushing special assessments for the initial projects so as not to dig ourselves in a financial hole any deeper. Apathy is king in my community, unfortunately. So what do we do about something like that?
Well, I would say we talked about that earlier about getting out of quicksand, and that's reaching out, updating your reserve study. We had that one slide, John talked through it, where you reach out for help. And it does take a duty of inquiry, again, as John articulated, reach out, get that help, and a duty of loyalty, a board that needs to act.
Okay. And I think that's probably what he's getting to, is that, okay, we've seen the problem, now we need to fix it. And what I would say here is, not to be, the experts are the experts, but John mentioned it, I'm going to mention it. Communication has got to happen, and a lot of it, very frequently, town halls, make sure people know why you're making the decisions, what had happened, so that everybody understands the why and how you're making those decisions.
Well, David,
Ultimately,
you said
it's
that
gonna save the
you
problem.
said that a moment ago, that one
Yeah.
association that had painted their board as the evil ones who were passing the special assessment, when they indeed were the only ones thinking clearly and saying, hey, we need to wake up and smell the coffee here, that our roof is falling apart, our siding is falling apart, we're spending good money after bad repairing it. We need to buckle down, do the right thing.
So here's a quick, can we get a quick answer on this one? We're getting down to really short time here. So if you were to have a few non-reserve items that needed to be funded, how do you suggest they do it? Should they borrow from the reserves and pay it back in a year, or should they have a special assessment, or what's your just top of level? This is obviously not specific enough to get into any details, but what would you do?
Generally, reach out to your reserve professional. If that passes the 4-part test and is a legitimate reserve expense, spend the money from reserves. Next time you update your reserve study, your reserve contributions will go up a little bit to make it up over years.
Yep. And if it does not meet the 4-part test, then you've got some statutory options, and you're going to have to consult with legal counsel, because you've got a limitation of 5% of your budget that you can spend on CapEx without approval of the board. Without approval of the membership, or you've got to go out for votes. And in some cases, your governing documents may even compel a vote of the membership. So you need to think very strategically about that. In other words, if you've got an association that wants to, I can't imagine it, but maybe you want to put in a dog park, or you want to put in a children's tot lot, and that was not part of the original development plan, that would be a capital improvement. And there are statutory things you need to think about before you embark on a project like that. And then the funding will, in a sense, become clear as you work through the statutory guidelines. That's the quickest answer, I think, for things that do not meet the 4-part test.
Okay, so that makes good sense. So we got about 2 minutes here, we continue to have questions about bringing. It says, is it proper to bring forward expenses to replace items earlier than the study recommends? So it's sort of, we have these expenses, and the suggestion was made, well, maybe you do them a little earlier. It changes your graph around if you have the funds available. What do you think of that?
It's an organic document.
Yeah.
Robert, speak to the fact that it can be updated.
Yeah.
Update, yeah. Number one, we're in the business of making estimates, and those estimates point associations in the right direction. We don't always hit the exact bullseye. And so, as John said, understand that they're estimates. And when we see that roof out 7 years, it may happen in 7 years. It may actually happen in 5. We get better each year that you update the reserve study. As that expense gets closer, we say, bingo, now we see it clearer. So updating a reserve study is a wise thing to do.
Okay, so that sounds good. So how often do you have to do a reserve study?
Good question. In the state of California, the statute here in California requires that the reserve study be updated on the basis of a with-site visit, a diligent with-site visit inspection, at least every 3rd year, and updated annually to stay on top of things and to make that Civil Code 5570 annual disclosure. So it's in the board's best interest to update annually. It is one of the association's largest budget line items. And among our clients, special assessments go down significantly among our clients that update annually. And no surprise, they're keeping their eye on the target and they're adjusting along the way.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. It's been great having you talk and give us this presentation today. I've got to apologize to the 37 or so questions that are left in the queue unanswered. We will be making this presentation available to all registered participants. Connor will be sending it out to you within the next 7 days. We appreciate his efforts in pulling this together as well. I want to thank everyone for participating today. ECHO holds more than 30 online educational programs per year. And we offer a vast array of resources for boards and HOA members. If you are not an ECHO member, please consider joining and supporting the oldest statewide association advocating for better communities and well-informed HOA boards and homeowners. To do so, simply go to our website at echo-ca.org and click on the membership tab. That concludes the planned presentations. Our speakers today, Robert Nordland, our speaker today, Robert Nordland from Association Reserves, has provided us with 5 copies of Understanding Reserves, a book he authored. If you don't win the raffle, you can find the book listed on Amazon Books. That's it for today. And for me, thank you for coming.